If you listen on Thursday, basically I was all in for, because at this point on Thursday, it was being rumored and being discussed that if leagues are going to resume, which are the ones that currently are being affected, which is MLB, NHL, and NBA, the best way that they can start or resume their leagues earlier is by having no fans involved. And I was all aboard, all on this plan, because at this point, we're about 3 weeks or so removed from any live sporting event going on. And I don't know about yourself, but I'm starting to go a little bit crazy. I'm starting to get a little bored. And I am definitely itching and dying for sports to return. So for me, anything or any way to return sports as soon as possible, I'm in for. So if it means really having the first 2 months of a sporting event, baseball, football, or really baseball, basketball, or hockey, return without any fans, I'm all in. Because at this point, I just want to watch live games. It'll be a little weird, for sure, not hearing, the crowd and seeing, that energy that comes in each stadium and hearing the roar of the crowd and really even hearing, the PA announcer and stuff like that. It'd be a little weird, get used to, but I'd rather get used to that than basically spend an extra few weeks or even a few months not watching sports, because they're waiting for when everything can return to normal. And when fans can return, that's when they will resume the leagues. So I was all in on that. But it's interesting because now, at least coming out of this meeting on Saturday, President Trump had a few interesting points that he made public once he did his briefing on Saturday that came out of this conference call, was that basically he believes, at least NFL-wise, the season will start as usual, which has to mean that if you put that dot together, that by the latest, September is when everything will be back to normal in the sports world, at least, where games could resume and players could play theoretically without getting sick or risky infection from this virus. And even more shockingly, I guess he'll say, is that he hopes to have fans in the stands by either August or September. So again, depending on what the NBA and NHL, how they resume their seasons, you could think that maybe if the playoffs come around, they could have fans in their stands if they do resume their season. And baseball, if they, start their season, their goal is June 1st. Well, their goal is mid-May, but let's realistically say it's closer to June 1st at the earliest. They could have the first half of the year or first half of their shortened season without fans. In the second half, theoretically, you can have fans back in the stands. And finally, at least that the biggest point that came out of this meeting was that the NBA, obviously Adam Silver, they were the first ones to really start this whole wheel in motion of sports league shutting down, right? Rudy Gobert test positive. Few minutes later, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, basically postponed the season right there. So no games were played after this point, and obviously the NHL, MLB, PGA Tour, tennis, every other sports league followed suit after that. But at least coming out of this meeting, there's one thing that there's one quote at least that I thought that was imperative and stood out above the rest, and it's kind of the theme of the segment I want to do here. Is that Adam Silver, first of all, again, he wants to be the first league to restart, to help jumpstart the economy, right? His thought was we were the trailblazers in just stopping sports altogether. We were the ones who really started the first domino to all these sports leagues having their seasons and all these events canceled, or at least postponed for most of them. He wants to be the one, he wants to be the league that restarts, helps to jumpstart the economy, and basically have the league be at the forefront and the catalyst for helping our nation kind of bounce back and get on the other side of this coronavirus that's crippled everything so far. But he made an interesting quote that I thought is imperative and more important than anything else. And that he said, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, he said he wants to restart their season, quote, once they get the all clear from public health officials. And to me, this is the most important quote that came out of this conference call between Trump and the 12 sports commissioners and executives over the weekend. Because I'm telling you, I'm begging sports, please, please, please do not tease us. And this is what I mean by that. If sports try to resume and rush back earlier than they should, or they rush back where there's still not 100% safety for the players, to where even if you quarantine them or put them in one city or do as much as you possibly can to limit their exposure to the virus, if there's still a chance that they can have exposure and get the virus, and more importantly, if we're still at a point in, let's say, June, July, or August, where there's still no vaccine, there's still no cure, I should say, where if you get it, you can take this sort of medicine to help cure you. And to where if you get the virus, you still have to be quarantined for 2 weeks, and everyone who has come in contact with you has to be quarantined for 2 weeks. There is a legitimate chance that sports will stop and start, and we will be teased with the resumption of sports, and then all of a sudden, just as quickly, sports will come to a halt again. And this has already happened. Not here in the U.S., but this should be a cautionary tale about what happened in Japan with their pro baseball league. The Nippon Pro League, again in Japan, had this exact thing happen. So their season was obviously affected just like ours here in the U.S. So they resumed and had a training camp that started March 20th. And they had the same idea that baseball had, essentially, was that they're going to quarantine these players as much as possible. They're going to start the season without any fans. And their goal was to start the season a month later on April 24th, which obviously is just about 2.5 weeks away. And what happened was, within a week of starting training camp, which is just, what happened, which started on March 20th, 3 different players tested positive for the coronavirus. So even though they tried their best to quarantine these players, have a training camp that limited their exposure per se and try to get them back in the baseball shape, but still wasn't enough, despite having no fans in attendance and limiting as much as personnel being there as possible, 3 players already got sick just a week into training camp. So basically a week into their spring training. So obviously now they, first of all, as soon as this came out, still didn't reconsider pushing the league back. And at least now they reconsidered doing that. So again, their goal was to restart on April 24th, basically have a month-long spring training. Within a week of that happening, 3 players got sick. So this is, to me, the worst case scenario that sports here in the U.S. could do. And this has to be a cautionary tale of what happened in Japan. Because to me, at least, and again, you heard on Thursday, I'm all in for the resumption of sports as soon as possible. I am. That is absolutely true. But just like Adam Silver said, I'm all in for the resumption of sports as soon as possible once the public health officials and the CDC and governors and governments and state governments give you the all clear that basically teams and people can start gathering again and there is less of a risk, or there's some sort of vaccine or antidote out there that can help cure you if you get sick. Because to me, at least, right now, looking at the landscape of how the coronavirus is out there, and there's not much help we can really do outside of just staying apart from each other and slowing the spread as much as possible. If there was somehow to be some sort of resumption anytime soon, despite having no fans in the stands, really all that does for the most part is save leagues and teams from lawsuits from fans. It basically saves fans from getting each other sick. Having no fans in the stands really for the most part does not prevent or help players from not getting sick, if you think about it, right? NBA, obviously, the fans are the closest. You have the courtside seats. You have players diving into the stands, and more times than not, NBA fans are the closest to the court compared to baseball and compared to hockey, especially compared to hockey, and the NFL as well. So having seasons and leagues start with no fans really doesn't ensure that players playing the game won't get sick, especially not to mention if they are still living their normal lives or living in cities that their home team is in. For example, look at the NBA with the Knicks and Nets here in New York and with Brooklyn and New York respectively, right? If they're going to play games with fans and the season's going to resume, let's say June 1st, and you play games with no fans, what is still stopping players from interacting with their families, interacting, on the way to the game, leaving the game, that will prevent them from getting sick? Right now, there's nothing. And again, playing with no fans, all it does is limit us as fans, our exposure from sitting next to someone that might have it. So obviously, you say as a team, you save yourself a lawsuit because now you don't have to worry about, let's say, 150 people compared to players, staff, coaches, trainers, and everyone that's working the TV broadcasts. Let's say that's all that is allowed in, 150 people. Obviously, that's less of a concern and statistically less of a risk of someone getting sick compared to 20,000 fans on top of that being in one place at the same time. But there has to be a way, and you have to make sure that these players, once they resume playing and practicing, have to be 100% safe, and there's no way either teammates can't transfer the virus from one person to another, or teams they play each other can't transfer the virus from one person to another. Because all that's going to happen is that teams are going to restart their leagues, restart practices, and just like Japan, in their pro baseball league, someone's going to get sick, and just like that, we're going to have a season, again, paused and derailed, and probably by that point, totally canceled. So I'd rather wait an extra 2 or 3 weeks if it ensures that there's a way that could guarantee players are quarantined, so either quarantined where they basically have no access to anyone from the outside world, essentially, except for those players playing. And there was a thought by the NBA, at least, they would put every team in Vegas because they have the summer league there already, that they would have the ability to basically put every team in Vegas, especially now that no one's there. and have the players basically stay there, quarantine themselves, and just only interact with their teammates, their coaches, and their teams, and have tests available to basically where they're testing players, support staff, hotel workers, arena workers, to basically create an environment where everyone that is going to the arena and participating in the game or helping out with the assistance of the broadcast of the game aren't being exposed somehow and taking it from home and bringing it to the arena. So they'd have basically a big giant bubble in Las Vegas that would prevent basically anyone from going to the outside world, and basically making sure that everyone that comes in contact with these players would be either, obviously would be tested and would make sure that they are safe as well. And right now, as you know, tests are the hardest thing we can find right now in this country. It is impossible to get tested. Even people with symptoms that are sick still can't get a test sometimes. So it's tough to think right now that there will be enough tests available to where you could basically test players in this league and test everyone that comes in contact with players every day. Because that's basically what it's going to come down to. Continual and constant testing day in and day out to make sure no players are sick, no coaches, support staff, trainers, broadcasters, cameramen, everyone that is going to be in that arena that night or at the stadium for baseball or however these leagues resume has to be tested on a daily basis. And as we know, with the NBA and the rest of the leagues, all it takes is one player to get sick. Nothing changes right now. All it takes is one player to get sick, to quarantine the entire team, to quarantine then all those teams that played that team recently. And as we know, it took Rudy Gobert one positive corona test to cancel an entire league or postpone an entire league. And then that domino dropped out to where every other sports league right now is on hiatus. It takes one player. So you have to be extra, extra, extra cautious and guarantee somehow that players, once practice resumes, once games resume, even if there's no fans there, you have to somehow guarantee these players will not get sick and will not transfer the virus from one person to another. So that's all I'm asking. If you're going to resume, I'm all in. Trust me. I said on Thursday, I am dying for sports to come back. I really am. Whatever it takes to make sure that sports come back as soon as possible, I'm in for it. No fans the rest of the season, I'm in. If the NFL, the only way the NFL can start their season on schedule and complete it as scheduled is to have no fans in the stands, I'm in. I will sit out a year. I will adjust to the games and watching games in a quiet stadium for one season if it means that it will basically return to these leagues as close to normal as possible. What I'm not down for is rushing back and basically hoping that these players don't get sick. Something has to be implemented. And right now, with our culture and the way the tests aren't administered readily, I'm not sure that's going to happen, to be honest. But at least that was my big thought, is I know Donald Trump, President Trump, really hoped that fans could be back by August and September, and really hopes that the NFL season will start as usual. I hope he's right. I really do, and I hope Adam Silver is right when he says that the NBA wants to be the first league to jumpstart this economy and really help lead the way back to normal life. I hope that's all true. But Adam Silver said it best. They can do that once they get the all clear from public health officials. That has to be the most important part. You have to guarantee these players can't get sick, because I think it'll only hurt morale. If you get fans excited, have teams start practicing, maybe even play a week of games, and then all of a sudden a league has to be canceled or postponed again because a player tests positive, and again, every other team and player has to be basically quarantined. So I hope that's not the case. If you have your thoughts, I'd love to get them either on Facebook, Worldwide Sports Radio Network on Facebook, or on Twitter at WWSRN_radio, or my personal Twitter handle, Ryan_Hickey, and the number 3 if you have any thoughts on, what happened from the meeting. Again, this is a big, big topic of conversation. When will sports return? Obviously, fans want them back as soon as possible, but the caveat has to be there has to be a safe way to return. Because to me, at least, the biggest morale drop, or the biggest way to hurt morale right now, is to have sports leagues say they're going to resume, start to resume, and then have to stop because a player gets sick.